Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very interesting conversation with Dean Alexander. He's the Director of Homeland Security Research, the research program at Western Illinois University, and a full-time professor as well. And I'm very pleased to be joined with him. He brings very much expertise. So, hello and very good day.
Good morning. Good morning, Cassian. Thank you for the opportunity to share some perspectives on a variety of topics this morning.
Perfect. So we often invite over people which are involved either within the private field or the public field within national security. And I think it's very important to as well know more about the academic side of national security and how one can advance in one's research, etc., within this great field because it's so vast. So, Professor, what have you noticed throughout your time, etc., studying this for the last 20 years, teaching about this for the last 20 years? How do you interact with things like terrorism, security, the law, etc.?
Mhm. Right. So the very diverse set of issues. You have domestic extremism, terrorism. You have international terrorism. You have terrorism undertaken by individuals, lone wolves, or a cabal or group, state-sponsored, or the state itself. You have regional different foci, either in Latin America, Middle East, etc. You have the aspects of radicalization, recruitment. You have diverse modalities. It's a little early to be talking about these topics, but suicide bombings, vehicle-borne explosives, use of gunfire, etc. You have diversity, diverse type of targets, government, private sector, individuals, mass targets. So I think there's a breadth in that scope. There are political ramifications. There are impacts on business. I think I may have mentioned in the past, I published two books on terrorism and business, Impact 9/11 in 2002, and then Business Confronts Terrorism 2005. We have now the impact of AI on radicalization, recruitment, the use of AI by nation states, by terror groups, capacity to generate videos as well in a very rapid, inexpensive manner. We see some legal aspects in terms of designation, designation of groups as foreign terror organizations. You have a number of them designated, 6 MDTOs, Mexican drug trafficking organizations, designated this year as FTOs, plus Tren de Largua, plus another one, a Venezuelan, plus another Venezuelan, Cartel de Soles, plus MS-13. So we have a lot of variants. There's discussion perhaps designating Muslim Brotherhood as an FTO. We also have the Houthis designated again as FTO. So we have a lot of variants, a lot of topics that students can look into and follow. And it's not static. It's very fluid.
Yes, definitely. I recently had a colleague of mine which looked into the tri-state area and looked at the involvement of
Mhm.
Hezbollah, etc., which was
Right.
very interesting as well. Because for many of these topics, we might hear the big names like ISIS, etc., right? But we might not know about these other institutions, which sometimes are extremely powerful, based in countries like Brazil or, like you mentioned, in other parts of South or Latin America. And these can oftentimes as well impact us here in the United States, right? So, being that you lectured at NATO at the State Department, but you also lecture to students at a university, how do you go about teaching such a heavy subject like terrorism to students, right?
Right. So at our university, we have undergrad courses in terror finance, terrorism and law enforcement, legal aspects of terrorism, principles of terrorism, homeland security entities. We have a class on terrorism and the internet and hate crime investigations. The last two are grad classes. So they have a sort of somewhat narrow, broadly narrow topic. With some of the training I've done at NATO, has a Center of Excellence on Terrorism in Turkey. Spoke about suicide bombings, different aspects on recruitment, legal aspects. Though usually an hour class. I've also trained police here in the U.S. at either fusion centers or specific police departments on different aspects of terrorism, sovereign citizens. hate groups, etc., for in some cases a few hours, sometimes full day. And in those classes, try to provide more insight and practical aspects that can help the law enforcement in their role, like using traffic stops as opportunities to potentially come across extremists or terrorists and the like. Also, officer safety issues. So there's a lot of breadth. Depending on the audience, then you adjust somewhat. In the classroom, I try to throw in some jokes once in a while, as much as you can, so we don't take ourselves too seriously or the topic. It's unfortunately a topic that's not new. It's at variances of terrorism, political violence occurring through time immemorial.
Yes.
So, and in some cases, leading to genocide and mass killings, etc. So, the serious topics, and unfortunately, it's continuing for the foreseeable future. That's the downside.
I definitely want to speak about go a bit more in depth about homeland security and terrorism and so forth. But I do think it would serve the audience to know a bit more about what first pulled you in to this field. So why did you even want to study it further academically and then as well teach it? I think that'd be
Right.
good to know, and how that shaped your perspective on terrorism as a whole.
Okay. That's a very good question. So I published on terrorism in law school in 1991, but I was exposed to the topic through my father, who was an academic,
Mm.
one of the leading academics in study of terrorism, Professor Yon Alexander. He passed about more than a year ago. He worked in the field for some 50 years, started a number of journals, published or edited over 100 books. So he's a pioneer in the field. So initially, I focused on international trade, foreign investment, worked in law, did some political risk, worked in a number of different countries in Chile, UK, Israel, also studied a year in Switzerland. And then after 9/11, decided to focus on terrorism a little more focused. And then basically we did the book together on terrorism and business impact 9/11. And I did some other work between 2002 to 2005. Then I decided to go into academia full time. I published a few books on NAFTA and investment, NAFTA and environment, prospects of Chile free trade agreement. So I'd always had an academic bent and did some teaching, both in Chile and in Israel, teaching actually international business law. So then I decided to go into academia full time, and I did that. I came here in August 2005.
Mhm. And from then on, you focus more on terrorism, right?
Yeah,
Or national security.
exclusively. Yeah,
Yes.
exclusively on terrorism, homeland security, some legal aspects as well. A bit more on the practitioner side, terrorism impact on law enforcement, how law enforcement responds
Mhm.
to that. Published the book in 2019 on family terror networks. So, like examples of family members getting involved in terror groups conducting attacks simultaneously. For the Kouachi brothers in France, or on 9/11, you had two sets of brothers and three cousins were of the 19. The Tsarnaev brothers, Boston Marathon, and others, both here and abroad.
Mhm. And so if we look at terrorism, national security, for many that might not be in the field, it always seems like a very distant field. It always seems like something which only a very specialized few focus on. Yeah, maybe for the people listening that might be in the field or might not be, what are some of the main issues you see raised at the moment? What are the relevant issues that you focus on and that you would recommend other people to focus on as well?
Okay, that's an excellent question. So, a number of aspects. One is the role of technology, the internet, social media to radicalize individuals. So a lot of them interact online, they get recruited online, some get recruited offline, some meet online and then act independently or actually interact with someone else offline. So the role of the internet to radicalize individuals. the role of AI and technology to accelerate the speed, reduce the costs, the breadth of content being disseminated almost 24/7 at a very low cost, the targeting of kids and youth 18 and under online by traditional terror groups, but also these sort of Fringe 764 nihilistic groups and others also in the hate realm, targeting kids that may be confused about their identity or the role they play, and increasing use of scapegoating of individuals here and abroad based on race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, etc. You have a mass polarization occurring, as you well know, here in the US as well as abroad. So exploiting that. You have also economic disparities that these groups are leveraging. You have historical antecedents that these groups are also leveraging as well. Conflicts that run hundreds of years, scapegoating, that sort of thing. And you also see, unfortunately, a level of aggressiveness and disregard to human life. Some of these groups, like 764, are purposely targeting kids for self-mutilation and videotaping kids in certain type of activities and trying to extort them, etc. So there are a lot of challenges that are going on. So those are some things that we see.
Yes. So for the government which we have, or any government which in the end, I guess, oversees the general activities of its citizens and is there as well primarily to protect its citizens for someone breaching or violating someone's rights, right? Uh, Given that, and you mentioned these various very difficult topics to deal with, right? Within this field, which unfortunately are happening, which are the truth, and one can't maybe brush them under the rug because they're uncomfortable, but these are just facts, right? Given that, what suggestions would you give not only to our government here in the US, but internationally, because this is an international cross-border
Right,
phenomenon, right?
right. So as other scholars and practitioners, and including your founder, Dexter Ingram, has talked about, it's a whole of society approach. Government has a role, but federal government, state government, the role of preventative activities, the role of private sector, nonprofits, non-governmental organizations, educational institutions, religious institutions, the role of family, friends, etc. It's holistic approach. It's not just one type of activity can reduce this this violence, which, as we know, has occurred for time immemorial. So there are a lot of challenges, but there are also a lot of roles that nation states can play, institutions can play, individuals, different type of networks. So these things just didn't arise spontaneously. They rose over time,
Mhm.
and the perpetrators are leveraging different tools in society, economic and otherwise. So too can society as a whole leverage the same instrumentalities against them to reduce the frequency and severity of these type of activities. And to underscore that political violence and this level of callousness is unacceptable and needs to be designated as not normal. So unfortunately, it's been a trend to normalizing violence, normalizing denigrating the other. So we need to take a different approach and say this type of behavior is not appropriate and should be stymied and fought aggressively on legal aspects and otherwise.
Would you say that this type of behavior has increased in the last decades? And if that is the case, why?
Well, you could argue that on the one hand, you have, with development of technology and news and transparency in terms of following what's going on globally, there's a greater understanding to chronicle all these different events. So that's one facet. You also have the leveraging of technology, the capacity for reduced cost to disseminate this content. So let's say 30 years ago, if you had a group that was radical and they were in one part of the country and they wanted to reach out to others, so they'd have to do it, offline or run ads. The cost would be much higher. The time would be much higher. Currently, any individual with certain type of ideation that's radical can utilize different types of social media to disseminate that content very rapidly. And in some cases, it's targeted. In other cases, just thrown out with the hope that someone will embrace that content and either act independently of that perpetrator or group, or do it in conjunction with them. So that technology has been a challenge. Also, this normalization, also in terms of mass shootings, the level of notoriety that some of these actors have had. So people try to emulate that. And so that's also been part of the challenge. And this normalization where people see violence globally with high frequency and they say, okay, that's, it's normal behavior. It's not taboo. So that's also been part of the challenge. We need to change that mindset that political violence and is not should be the aberration and not the norm.
So for the record, you would say then that it has increased in the last decades?
Yeah, it depends what sort of stats you want to use. But in terms of the perception, at least, you could see you have other stats saying there's been a decline. I mean, on the one hand, you could say increase in hate crimes. As you may know, here in the U.S., hate crimes sometimes underreported, and sometimes either by the victim or by police departments. So you could argue, obviously, depending on certain sectors, you had certain targets had an increase in targeting. Anti-Semitism has increased significantly here in the U.S. Other types of hate crimes have risen. In terms of international terror attacks here on U.S. soil, you could argue there's been a decline. On the other hand, you've had some increase in left-wing oriented activity. You also had law enforcement been much better in terms of ferreting out these extremists and arresting them before they conduct an attack. So in terms of prosecution at the state level and federal level, that's also been quite important.
Yes. And you mentioned the cost to disseminate content, right, as one of the key factors. And it made me think that back in the day, or even just a decade or so back, of course, you would read of certain issues happening in the globe, right? You would hear about certain wars happening, right? But nowadays, we get to see it 24/7 and through the devices we carry around the whole day, right? And so, as before, even though one would have a television, of course, the advent of the television probably led to even more of this turmoil, right? But then now, this even increase of exposure due to the telephone, like you said, might have propagated it even more, right? It might have made it go much higher. So, how would you recommend then? I think this is a very practical question. One would go about all these issues, especially given uh, people who might not generally be susceptible to terrorism or to security. But I think the research sometimes does show that even those people are sometimes victims to certain marketing or certain advancements made on social media and other platforms, right?
Right. So I think one approach is you could differentiate between people, 18 and under, and those that are adults. So
Mhm.
assuming one's in a quote unquote serene and calm family setting, then have family being very proactive regarding the use of technology by their kids. So either limiting or prohibiting, the use of the internet or phones up to a certain age, or social media, that the parents should have the right to have the password of the kids and check things,
Mhm.
on a daily basis,
Yes.
and also raise awareness of the risks, both at to parents as well as at schools. and also to the kids themselves to recognize that unfortunately these tools, these phones and otherwise, are being utilized by extremists of different ilks to undermine the recipient of their canards and propaganda.
Hmm.
So that's one role. The other is prosecutions of groups and group members in terms of solicitation of hate crimes. So
Yes.
it's the federal prosecutions of that. So using the law, the criminal law that exists, and perhaps crafting new legislation to target the purveyors of this type of content, as well as those that are trying to utilize that for criminal activity.
Mhm.
So again, to take a position that this type of behavior is improper and needs to be targeted aggressively in legal aspects and otherwise.
Yes. And you
And
mentioned
also, yeah, sorry,
limiting like phone use as an example, right? And it made
right,
me think to a conversation I had with Eric O'Neill, who said that he tries to limit the phone or at least give access to the phone and only does it starting 14 or so for his kids,
mm,
right? And then
right,
gives them slowly access to the internet and other social media.
right. So that's a role as well. Also, there's a responsibility of some of these social media companies that know that their platforms are being utilized by these groups
Mhm.
uh, and um, and try to oversee that, interact with law enforcement, and expunge that type of content and actors from their websites.
Mhm. So I think this question after our conversation will be interesting. If you look at all these issues on a day to day, this is your main profession, right? This is your vocation as a person. Do you ever feel hopeless looking at everything which is going around, or do you feel like there is potentially a solution one day? What is like your emotional stance in that regard?
Right. Well, I don't think there's a solution. I think, unfortunately, given human nature, uh, up to this point, you're going to continue having, and going forward, you're going to continue having some facets of political violence, traditional crime, and otherwise. But um, there are tools by which society can combat these challenges. As I said, and as others have said in the past, as whole societies, the role of government, private sector,
Like,
nonprofits, the role of families, et cetera, the role of the media. But of course, it is a bit disappointing. I think you have merging the past 10 years or so. Heretofore, you had sort of traditional type of terrorists that were either focusing on self-determination, nationalism, religiously motivated terrorism, terrorists that are pushing a particular type of political ideology, some hate groups and ilks like that. But you have these sort of fringe-oriented or single-issue terrorism we've seen for several decades, like animal rights environmentalists, anti-abortion, anti-technology. But you've seen groups such as, sort of the incels, or you've seen movements like QAnon. You've had, may have seen earlier this year, there was a suicide bombing of a guy with a group called a movement called antinatalists. So he's upset. He was upset that he was born and never gave anyone the right to allow him to be procreated again. So you have a lot of these fringe oriented. So that's a bit surprising. Also these 764 groups, these nihilistic groups. So you have, besides the traditional extremism
yeah.
terrorists that you had in the past, you have these new types that are, again, somewhat fringe and somewhat limited, but unfortunately, they're quite potent. Plus, another thing I wanted to mention is the internationalization and the networking collaboration of these different extremists, either ideation wise or group to group wise. So, unfortunately, these tenants, extremist tenants that may initiated in the US are disseminated globally, and you have different iterations of them, in dozens of countries, if not more. So whether it's even sovereign citizen ideation or QAnon, different versions of that, if we've seen across the globe. And same thing, obviously, with religiously motivated terrorism and others as well, left-wing oriented. So just by chance, you had, I think this week, you had the designation, or the past couple of days, designation of several Antifa-related actors in Europe designated as going to be as FTOs. Mentioned the Muslim Brotherhood may be designated as FTO here in the U.S. So you have a lot of activity going on on multiple ideological spectrums.
Mhm. I like that you highlighted the family, which oftentimes is the core and everything comes out of it, right? The education one receives and just the wellness one receives from the family, I think is very important and probably is the best preventative for all these issues, right? If that is well constructed. And also, I can add that for many of these nihilistic groups, especially, because we had many of these movements since like the last 200 years, etc.
Mm.
And Nietzsche being one of course, the main philosophers in that regard. Uh, Oftentimes, I guess the main counter agent against that would be to actually have a meaning in one's life, even though it sounds like a right like a thing which is common sense. But oftentimes, I think for these different groups which might come up with these crazy ideas, if one is actually striving towards a certain good thing, like yourself as a professor, educating people and so forth, giving back then one has much less the feeling of harming others, etc., which is something we definitely have to mitigate. It's very important. And to wrap it up as well, I remember a conversation I had with Kelly Murray where we spoke about chemical security. She worked for the Department of Homeland Security for the chemical infrastructure and so forth segments and critical infrastructure. And she also mentioned this to me that many terrorist groups would even use chemicals to promote or so to say to inflict the things that to put on to other people what they want to do, right? Because we mainly in this conversation spoke about media, about the advancements, about the psychological state of many individuals and also the groups. But that conversation was also interesting because it gave more of a context on how they can even use chemicals to do what they actually want to inflict upon a civilization. So then, last question I would have, Professor, would be about career opportunities. Let's say
Mm.
someone listens to this, they think it's very fascinating, they want to step in your shoes, right? And how would you recommend that they would go about advancing themselves academically in this realm?
Okay, that's excellent question. So one would be obviously in current studies, continue in that realm, take courses in national security, homeland security, terrorism, potentially learn a foreign language, perhaps get interested in a certain topic and either try to publish on your own or reach out to a professor and speak to him or her regarding publishing an article. Pursue different internships in the private sector, public sector. It also suggests opportunities in law enforcement, federal, state, local law enforcement are also interesting opportunities for people to get some exposure. Some students may want to pursue careers in the military, either full-time or working in the National Guard. There are also some financial benefits for some of the students as well. So I think there are a lot of different opportunities, perhaps pursuing a master's degree online or in person, depending on the opportunity. So the good news is that unfortunately that there are a lot of opportunities to combat these types of challenges that we've talked about.
Mm.
And we continue need, as the extremists keep getting a conveyor belt of new adherents, we also need to have a conveyor belt of people that are combating this field in this challenge in different realms. So either academically or in private sector, law enforcement, military, State Department, those types of roles.
How would you recommend the role of a professor if someone is interested in that?
Well, suggest getting education. In some cases, to teach full time, you may need a law degree or a doctorate or master's, depending on the opportunity. Do some publishing, get some professional experience in any of these fields. Perhaps work overseas, get some exposure there. So there are many different routes. There's no uniformity in terms of what's the best background. Depending on the field, they may want people of a certain background, but I think there are open to different experiences as well.